on the grounds. And so it was an opportunity to check some of it out, but I need to just go back and enjoy the beauty and just everything that they have there. So nice. So, okay, we're going to wait a little bit longer before we get started. Hopefully, there's other fall activities you want to recommend. Thanks, Joe, for sharing that one. And I hope that your mother-in-law got home and found things to be in order. So we will wait a few more minutes. We have a great representation in our attendance today, so we want to give everybody the opportunity to join us here before we start. Our speakers do have a lot of great information to share with us, so we will be starting promptly at 2 o'clock today. We do have a nice, it's called the Nelson's Kids You Pick Them Pumpkin Patch here in the Minden area, where you can just go out into the field and you're on the honor system to pay for what you pick, but it's kind of fun for young and old alike. So if you haven't gone to a pumpkin patch yet, that's kind of a fun thing to do in our area that I would recommend. I see people continuing to join us. Just want to say welcome. You are joining the October edition of the HomeNE Learning Network. If this is your first time joining us, we do see a lot of new names on the registration list this month. Let us know that you're here and where you might be joining us from. I don't know if we lost Josh. I see the screen changing there a little bit. Josh, are you with us still, or did we lose you?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was trying to get it up on YouTube going.
Oh, okay.
Is it not showing the PowerPoint?
Yeah, but for a while we saw your screen.
Yeah, it just opened over there. I apologize.
Okay. So, okay. We'll give everybody just one more minute and then we'll get started. So we are streaming to our YouTube channel. So if you do encounter technical difficulties, just hop over to YouTube and you can see the presentation today that Joe and Amy have prepared for us. So let me just get us rolling here because, as I said, our speakers do have a lot of great information to share. Welcome to the October edition of the HomeNE Learning Network. Thank you for joining us today. This is a monthly presentation that we do for individuals such as yourselves. I'm Lori Ferguson, and I'm with South Central Economic Development District. We office in Holdridge, Nebraska, and cover a 13-county region in central and south central Nebraska. SCED, as we commonly refer to ourselves as, serves as the lead organization for the HomeNE Learning Network, and it's designed for all people from across Nebraska. As I mentioned earlier, we've noticed that we had several new people joining us today, and we thank you for continuing to add to our network and for registering for our webinars. If you are new or haven't joined us for a while, I just wanted to take a moment and share the purpose of the HomeNE Learning Network with you. It's designed for people from all across Nebraska who are seeking to successfully address their local housing challenges. The purpose of HomeNE is to create a setting that provides face-to-face and online opportunities to foster interaction, engagement, and skill building for local individuals who are passionate about addressing their housing shortages. And HomeNE also empowers and encourages participants to apply what they learn through the different avenues that are made available to them through the Learning Network. You might notice a different face. Josh Young is here in our office, and he's doing the back end of our HomeNE Learning Network today as Sherry travels. So welcome to Josh. So also today we are joined by Amy Hawsey of RDG Design and Joe Spitzen of the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. They are going to be bringing us a presentation about the recent housing toolkit that was completed and just sharing that with all of you as well as some other topics related to that. So before we begin though, I'm going to turn it over to Amy and Joe. Would you both just introduce yourselves to our group, please, and tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Lori. My name's Amy Hawsey. As Lori said, I'm with RDG Planning and Design. I've been with RDG for about just a little over 25 years now, and my focus over that time has been housing market studies, community comprehensive planning, downtown revitalization, do a little bit of bike and ped, but mostly most of my focus over the years has been in housing market studies and strategies and in comprehensive community planning. So excited to be here and share some of the work that we got to do with NIFA.
I'm Joe Spitzen. I'm Program and Education Coordinator at NIFA. I will hit 4 years with them in 2 days. I manage the Housing Study Grant Program. I help plan our annual conference, which will be coming up in April of 2025. Other than that, I've been helping out with our work with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, and I helped a lot with the Homeowner Assistance Fund.
Okay, wonderful. I'll just turn it over to, I believe Amy is starting us off today. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'll be great. Thanks. So just kind of real quick, on my first slide here, you'll see I want to give a little bit of a shout out to a gal. Her name's Ruva, and she was a graduate student in the planning program at UNL, who was a intern of ours in the summer of 2023, and she assisted NIFA in development of the toolkit. And what you're going to see is a few slides that we put together that were part of a presentation that we did about a year ago down in Kansas City as part of a conference, American Planning Association conference that was down in that area. Yeah, Josh, you can go ahead and move to the second slide. I don't know if it's not showing up for me, and maybe it is for others. So real quick, wanted to just kind of give some highlights of the types of toolkits that exist out there. And communities and regions, we see a lot of regions that end up doing toolkits, regions or states that they do them for a wide variety of reasons. Sometimes just to have as kind of a comprehensive housing toolkit. Sometimes they're very focused on kind of affordable housing and how to address some housing affordability issues. You'll see other ones that are very focused around policy or maybe population specific. So things like how we're dealing with homelessness or in the unhoused in a community. There's also advocacy related toolkits. And I'm going to give a couple examples before I hand this over to Joe. And one of them that I'm going to talk a little bit about did grow out of this kind of advocacy sort of idea and the need to address NIMBYism in a community. And then just also, how do you help with kind of the development process itself? So the first example that I'll kind of give and share and talk a little bit about comes out of Indiana. Luckily, you guys probably don't need to see my slides, so I'm going to just keep going if that's okay with everybody, or if it's too distracting, I can pause and wait, but I'll probably just keep rolling because it's not essential to see my slides. So in 2019, we did a regional housing study with 11 counties in southern Indiana And as part of that region, within that region, and actually where the project was based out of was Bloomington, Indiana, which is the home of Indiana University. And they, it's kind of interesting because Purdue is actually their land grant school. So that's actually where their extension offices come out of. But Indiana University also provides some types of extension type services, especially to rural areas. So one of the things that their kind of rural initiative, rural focus out of the University of Indiana was they developed what they called the Hoosier Housing Ready Toolkit. And really the focus of this was for the more rural areas that they serve, and just increasing kind of rural prosperity was part of that focus. There we go. Perfect. They were looking to address some of the issues when the market was really kind of lagging behind, when the market wasn't responding to what they thought was needed, and it was kind of slowing down the growth. So the toolkit was really designed to help those communities meet some of their housing challenges through things that where they thought would just help be more practical, be collaborative, and be strategic. And I've tried to include links to these. So if you're interested in going and looking at these toolkits a little bit closer, I did try to include the links there. Next slide, Josh, that'd be great. So what this toolkit really did was start to lay out what kind of the 10-step process is that a community needs to do to get ready for housing development, to really position themselves. And so this is one of those toolkits that's kind of very generalized, and kind of helping communities just get started. And part of me says that probably a lot of folks on this call are maybe a little bit beyond this toolkit already. But it just, in this one, and you'll see some things here that, or in this one that are also part of the Nebraska one that Joe's going to talk a little bit about. But, assembling your working group, conducting your assessment, what do you need? What's your target? What's your kind of focus area need to be on? Identifying, I think the number 3 is also really interesting, and that's identifying some of the factors that influence quality of life. So it's kind of this, I thought this was was actually pretty interesting, of housing doesn't stand alone in a community, and quality of life things also can impact whether or not you're sometimes seeing some housing development occurring within your community. And then also exploring some of the financial incentives and subsidies that were out there was kind of one of the next steps in the process. Go ahead, Josh. Then the next few pieces here were locating some potential sites, conducting a preliminary site evaluation. And really, I think for a lot of communities, if they're just trying to get ready and be ready for development, that's probably a good place to kind of at least get through number 7. Some of those preliminary pro formas can be helpful, but with the cost and changing costs of materials and interest rates and everything, those can become out of date pretty quickly. But then once you have kind of a developer that's interested, then it lays out how to begin to conduct a little bit more site evaluation. And I've got a couple other examples that might go into this if we've got time a little bit later. And then this one was also in the next step is working with that developer to kind of prepare that more detailed pro forma. So really, this is meant to be kind of a step-by-step guide. So this is one example. The next example comes from Johnson County, Kansas. So Johnson County actually probably isn't very, it is not similar probably to most of the communities and individuals that are on this call. If you're familiar with Johnson County is the on the Kansas side of the Kansas City metro area. It's the home to the Overland Parks and the Olathes. And so large population base, but also very high income population base. And when we were working on their housing study, one of the things that came out of this was, how do we begin to build more housing advocates? One of the things they needed was, they needed people showing up and saying, housing is important in our community, and housing that those who that protect us, educate us, and serve us, and take care of us and our health needs. That was kind of how they framed it, that those individuals need housing in our community because a lot of those individuals can't afford to live in Johnson County. So that was how they kind of framed it. But yet when a project that would maybe be in range for those individuals would come to planning commissions and city councils, the NIMBYism would come out in full and strong force, fighting those projects. So this toolkit really started as one that the idea behind it was to create some educational pieces for individuals who could show up and speak to the other side of the topic of why it was so important to have this housing for our communities and the health of our communities. But as the toolkit was being developed, it really became more of a, thank you, Lori, for putting that in there. I'm always forget some of the acronyms we need to talk out. So yeah, NIMBYism is not in my backyard. So those barriers, it began to get a little bit broader. The toolkit did, and really became a little bit more of an implementation tool for their overall housing study. So it started looking at other barriers and issues that needed to be addressed and how they were going to begin to move forward on those, from, you know, the ability for individuals to age in place, to things like how to overcome some of the financial risks. Just the knowledge and resources of different programs that were out there. Josh, you can go ahead and forward. But again, we mentioned that NIMBYism and helping people understand how they could come and speak to the topic, but also just understanding the overall cost of living, and how housing fit into that, and why housing, especially at along our major corridors that had access to transit in their case, or access to jobs, was really important, and how you factored in the overall cost of living and where housing fit into that piece of it too. The other one I think here that you might also find kind of interesting was just the political will. There was a lot of conversations around, well, we have these types of projects in our planning documents, but now we needed our councils to have the political will sometimes to approve something that was in our plans, but yet potentially had, you know, a good group of people showing up at a council meeting, not wanting to see the cornfield behind their house turned into any kind of housing whatsoever, whether it was affordable or not. So that was another piece of kind of that this began to kind of try to address. So overall, kind of when you look at all the different types, there's more examples of this, but I thought we'd rather spend most of our time kind of hearing from Joe and hearing about the Nebraska toolkit for Nebraskans. But what do we think about that we need to include in a toolkit if you're interested in putting one together? You know, so the process for this that we always encourage is kind of first research the different components from other housing toolkits, what went into those. Compile some topics that you think are applicable to your community that you need to focus on, and then kind of going back and confirming with stakeholders that the topics that are being addressed are filling the knowledge gaps you need. The last thing you want to do is an exercise in assembling information that nobody really needed because it's not really where they had the knowledge gaps, or it's not really the tools that they need. So making sure you're kind of coming back to those stakeholders and confirming that this is what's really needed and helpful in the community. So I'm going to hand it over to Joe and let him talk a little bit more specifically about the Nebraska example.
Thanks, Amy. All right. I usually just do an introduction on this slide so we can move forward, since we already knocked that out. There we go. So here I'm just going to talk quickly about NIFA and what we do. NIFA is the state of Nebraska's housing finance agency. Every state in the union, as well as Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Washington, D.C. has at least one HFA. NIFA celebrated its 40th anniversary last year, having been formed by the Nebraska legislature by statute in 1983 as a quasi-governmental entity to perform essential public functions. The next slide is just our mission, vision, and values. Our mission is to grow Nebraska communities through affordable housing and agribusiness. We work across the state to support housing in various ways, such as working with local lenders to provide mortgages with down payment assistance for low to moderate income homeowners. In October last year, we launched our Welcome Home program. That's for home buyers who don't meet the requirements of our traditional first home loan program. We allocate low-income housing tax credits for projects across the state, with over 19,000 units currently active in the state of Nebraska. We provide technical assistance to communities and nonprofits via our housing study grants, our Native American Community Impact grants, and our outreach partnerships. So in early 2022, NIFE invited a volunteer coalition of Nebraska organizations and stakeholders to address the statewide housing crisis. The resulting Strategic Housing Council was financially supported and facilitated by NIFA as part of the overall strategic goals identified by our board and staff in cooperation with the Department of Economic Development and at the request of the governor. There's no specific legal entity housing the group of volunteers. It's a coalition of the willing, and it's made up of people from across the state and a variety of organizations, including economic development districts like this one, state agencies, the legislature, municipalities, bankers, land developers, builders, and nonprofits. Next slide is our vision statement for the Strategic Housing Framework. The framework is both a report on the current state of housing in Nebraska. It's based on a statewide needs assessment and is an outline of the challenges and barriers to creating an attainable and affordable housing in our state. The framework includes a set of strategies to reduce or eliminate barriers that prevent forward progress on housing solutions. The next slide is the organization of the framework. The council established 4 pillars to address its shared priorities. The pillars are finance, education and policy, safety net and special populations, and workforce. I'm here by virtue of my place as chair of the Pillar 2 work group, which is education and policy. These are just some definitions that we have in our toolkit. This is a presentation that we've done for Department of Health and Human Services, League of Nebraska Municipalities, and UNL extension offices. So I know that you'll know a lot of the definitions that we show in here, but this will also just kind of give you an idea of what's in the toolkit. So we talk about affordable housing a lot, and when we have that capitalized, capital A, capital H, we mean that any housing that is subsidized through a state or federal affordable housing program, that's what we consider an affordable housing unit. If it's not capitalized, that's just any housing that's affordable and attainable. It's housing that's income appropriate regardless of type, and that includes market rate as well as subsidized housing. AMI is area and median income that's calculated county by county. Different state and federal programs serve people within defined AMIs. For example, our low-income housing tax credit program serves tenants whose household earnings are generally 60% or less of the median income, while the Nebraska Homeowner Assistance Fund, which closed just last month, served people who earned up to 100% AMI. Diverse housing is the mix of housing types needed for any given community. That includes homes that are owned and rented, single family and multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, apartments. And a household is considered housing burdened if they spend 30% or more of their income on housing costs, to include utilities. So the framework is organized around 2 broad problem statements and 2 resulting shared priorities. The goal of shared priorities is to obtain broad support across Nebraska, enabling collaborative work to achieve our collective goals. These are the problems that we identified with the statewide needs assessment, which was conducted for us by Queen City Development. The first is that housing is unaffordable. There are 176,000 households in Nebraska that are housing cost burdened. This mainly impacts homes that are earning $75,000 a year or less. The second is that there is insufficient diverse housing. The current housing stock is aging, and what's left is short on options with lower price points, especially housing for that have accessible needs and that are made for the elderly. To address the problems, these are our shared priorities. To reduce the number of households that are burdened by 44,000, decreasing the burden of low to middle income housing from 44% of the population to 33 or less, and also to develop or rehab 35,000 affordable and attainable middle and low income units. We're looking to accomplish both of these goals by 2028. This is just a visualization of how each pillar group has 2 or 3 goals, all of which support the Housing Council's overarching shared priorities. So our pillar's first goal was to create a diversified housing toolbox to support stakeholders in establishing best practices. Our toolkit to increase housing supply is the result of ideas that came from our group's planning session. Amy Ruva and her team at RDG prepared the toolkit, taking information from our year of brainstorming together and then doing their own independent research and forming it all into a cohesive document. Since then, we've been continuing to review and edit it with the rest of my pillar and NIFA staff. And so we completed our toolkit. We publicly announced it last April at the Innovation Expo, NIFA's annual conference. I think we're a slide too far. We're hopeful that this will help communities achieve their goals more quickly and efficiently by giving them relevant information up front, describing mechanisms to remove common barriers to housing development, and showing the order of operations so people can reduce waiting and time wasting. And our toolkit takes varying community size into effect, as well as proximity to other communities. We recognize that the communities across the state have specific housing issues and needs that preclude us from taking any sort of one-size-fits-all approach. We worked hard to make this accessible to all Nebraskans. We did our best to avoid jargon, or as you saw by our definitions page, at least explain it. Since we launched this just 6 months ago, we've already completely recreated the document in a new format to make it hyperlegible and meet Americans with Disability Act recommended standards, as well as taking it from, I guess we had this created in an obscure Adobe format, and now the document in its original form lives in Microsoft Word, so it's easy for us to update on the fly as we learn more and discover best practices that are even better. This is just a QR code that takes you to our framework page on NIFA.org. Feel free to scan this. You can scroll down a bit and expand the Pillar 2 dropdown, and then you'll see the link to the toolkit document itself. So go ahead and scan that. It'll appear later in the presentation as well, and so you can take a look and really dive in later. So the purpose of the toolkit is to help Nebraska communities expand their supplies of affordable, diverse housing. The document isn't comprehensive. We don't think it can be, but there is a lot to learn from the best practices we identified. The toolkit is built to get interested communities solving these problems by describing how to assemble a housing working group and giving examples of the local stakeholders and professionals who should be included because of their vested interest or knowledge base. Explaining what housing assessments are, why they're worth doing, and how to do one. We give examples of different types of housing. Maybe a small town is almost all single family, and because that's all they have, it hasn't occurred to them that anything else could or should be built. And maybe they have a market for duplex or triplex rentals that they could tap into. We discuss the benefits of increasing housing density, how the creation of new denser housing or infill where roads, utilities, and services already exist allow for development savings that can be passed down to renters and buyers. We go over the development process and roadblocks that can be expected, like zoning regulations, and the changes that can be made to promote a healthy housing stock. All right, so why do we want affordable housing that's available in a diverse array of options? It promotes socioeconomic diversity within communities. We believe that people should be able to live in the communities where they work. It addresses housing affordability challenges at various income levels. It enhances inclusivity and accessibility to housing opportunities. Having a diverse options in housing allows for diverse residents, which fosters vibrant and resilient neighborhoods. It supports economic growth and workforce development. There are companies all the state that want to grow where they are or who want to expand across the state, but they can't do that without workers, and workers need places to live. Towns that can attract and retain a diverse talent pool will strengthen community cohesion and enhance social connections. So our target audience is small to medium population Nebraska communities with a housing shortage or at least a shortage of the housing that people actually need in that area. Generally, the residents know that they have a housing problem, but don't know how to begin solving it. And we're looking to make housing advocates of those folks who have good intentions but are light on experience by providing effective tools and resources for housing advocates and facilitating the creation that's necessary for residents to thrive. I think you jumped ahead so you can stay on this slide for me. This is just an example of some of the information we put in the toolkit. One of the first actions to take, if not the very first, is to assemble a team to identify the appropriate housing plan and the products that best fit a community's need. The team should be comprised of stakeholders who are knowledgeable about the local housing market and are committed to creating a plan and are especially willing to advocate to turn those ideas into solutions. Some key stakeholders are residents who need quality housing, employers who need units to house the workforce they have and the workforce that they plan to have, local government officials to help facilitate alignment between housing projects and the existing plans and infrastructure. Additionally, they'll be aware of bureaucratic red tape and ideally can help guide people around it. Real estate agents who are knowledgeable about the housing market, but they're also aware of what prospective customers are telling them they want to buy. Contractors familiar with the development process, especially those with available workers in the area. Community lenders who are interested in investment opportunities, and planners, architects, engineers, and developers who know their processes, know what's feasible, and can guide projects. And so how do we use the toolkit to bring changes to our communities? We take the team that we just built on the previous slide and establish a local or regional housing group. The team of stakeholders is committed to pulling together a plan, selling the community on it, and following through on it. You want to conduct a housing assessment to identify the types, quantity, and quality of housing that you already have. These assessments will help guide decision makers in creating a housing development plan. You can do this by self-assessing and gathering quantitative information about the housing market. You want to count the number of owner-occupied units, renter-occupied, vacant units. Gather demographic information about the community, population size, race, ethnicity, age cohort. You can do windshield assessments by having volunteers travel around the area to inventory exterior housing conditions and vacant lots. Things to consider when you're doing a windshield assessment includes foundation, roof, window, siding, porch, and just the overall impression of the home. If a community has funds available, you can hire a professional community planner to conduct a housing study. This is going to be more in-depth generally than just a self-assessment. The planner will conduct a sweeping review of the existing housing, analyze it along with migration trends, and create a plan for moving forward that takes into consideration where you are and where you want to be. The cost of these varies quite a bit based on the size of the study and what you're asking for. NYFA does have a housing study grant program that can help defray the cost of the study, but it is a competitive program, and so it's not guaranteed funds by any stretch. If a previous housing assessment has been done within a few years or even longer, you can compare the information that you learn and track changes that have occurred since then. And so these assessments will help guide decision makers in creating your housing development plan. Our toolkit includes examples of different housing types and case studies of what other communities have been able to successfully accomplish. For example, I'm in Papillion, and just about 5 miles west of me is the Prairie Queen neighborhood. It consists of a mixture of missing middle housing types like duplexes and triplexes. It's made to be walkable. Some of the buildings were specifically developed for live work. And Prairie Creek has been praised as a national model for neighborhood development, mainly for its use of multiple housing types to increase density. So the toolkit's available on NIFA.org for anybody who'd like to see it. And from here, our worry really is that it becomes like a library book that doesn't get checked out. So with that in mind, the Pillar 2 team is in the early stages of drafting a technical assistance program so that we can provide guidance along with the text. The first step was to the first step was to identify the most important aspects of the toolkit that warrant inclusion in a process guide. So if the toolkit itself is a school textbook, the process guide is our teacher's manual. We want the process guide to include information from the toolkit that we feel is so important it can't be missed, as well as concepts that are complex enough that we think discussion and hands-on support would be especially helpful. All right, C4H. C4H is Communities for Housing. This is the standalone program that we want our technical assistance program to evolve into. It's modeled on C4K, which is Communities for Kids. That's a program that was established by the Nebraska Children's and Families Foundation. And we've been working with Alex Lebens from Nebraska Children to help us draft our process guide. Some of the most recent things our Pillar Group has been doing is brainstorming on what would make a community especially ready to be a technical assistance partner. And that is what qualities let us know that a community is prepared to move ahead and succeed. And that is the end of my presentation, so we can turn it back over to Amy to continue with her slides.
Yeah, Josh, if you want to go back to, I think we have time, we can go back to the other one. And while you're doing that, I'll maybe answer Chad's question that he put into the chat. I think I saw that and I think I can answer that. So Chad, one of the ways that we've done this for other communities, and it's not, so it doesn't end up being quite maybe as detailed, but for a community like the size of Hastings, is to do it more using some kind of a generalized field assessment, but also just data that you have. So where have you had code violations? Where are you doing, where have you had nuisance abatement issues or something like that? And tagging those in GIS, if you don't have those done already, which a lot of communities do. And then kind of combining that a little bit with just kind of a general, tour of the community to kind of say high level, this is neighborhoods. So for Kearney, we did some of that data analysis, but then we also just kind of did a high level tours that helped us then say, these neighborhoods are maybe a little bit more appropriate. We saw more housing with maybe condition issues, and there might be more appropriate for infill or redevelopment, while these neighborhoods, the housing just generally kind of felt in better condition. And that's what the data is also telling us too. There's fewer code violations. So maybe this is more rehab area targeted. So that's an approach that we've taken in some a larger communities. Like in Lincoln, we did some heat maps on where they were getting a lot of their code violations and combine that with some of the other data. Because you're right, it's very time consuming to do a house by house assessment for bigger cities. Okay, so since we have some time, I thought maybe a couple other tools and resources that all of you might also find kind of interesting. And this was one Lori and I were talking about earlier. Maybe this one actually should just be its own session too. But so a couple years ago, Midwest Housing Development Fund, excuse me, put together this lot prep guide. We helped them assemble this, and it's really meant to be as a technical assistance and capacity building, just kind of helping implement some of the goals that communities have. So you can see the link down there will take you to, and I should have done QR codes. That was smart, Joe. That would have been a lot easier than people trying to type in the email addresses. Go ahead, Josh, to the next slide. So what the lot prep guide did is it divides into 3 different types of developments: individual infill lots and kind of process and things you need to be thinking about. And I'll talk about that here in a second. Multi-lot redevelopment. So not just the individual lot we have here or there scattered around, but we have a half block or we have a full block because, you know, something, a business or something went away and we've got a larger area. And then also greenfield development. We're going out, how do we do lot development out in kind of a new developing greenfield area? Go ahead, Josh. So for each one of these areas, the guide then identifies physical site considerations that as a community you would need to do, legal considerations. So if you have an infill lot, what are some of the legal considerations and things that you might be working through? And as you can see, we tried to kind of almost make this a little bit of like a checklist. Like, you need to complete all of these things in this process. And then also kind of city processes, you know, looking at the lot. What do you want to do with it? Does it match with the city's comprehensive plan? What is the zoning for it? Will you have to get it rezoned? So kind of checklisting through all of those kind of city processes that you might also need to be considering. Go ahead, Josh. So that was the lot prep guide. Happy to answer more questions about that. Another one was a lot of you, and I left this one in because I thought a number of communities now are forming their own land banks. So I thought you might find this also interesting. A couple of years ago, we helped the Omaha Municipal Land Bank with their disposition strategy. So they were trying to determine how to best prioritize how they would sell or just, you know, their lots. And they had some criteria in place. Oops, go back. Thank you. So one of the things that we started to look at was because they realized there were some lots that they wanted to hold back because of where they might be located. So we started off with the lots adjacent to larger redevelopment project areas. So there's a couple in East Omaha, both north and south. There's a couple of really large redevelopment projects that are taking place, part of the Choice Neighborhood grants that they received from HUD. So they said, you know what, if the lots are kind of adjacent to those areas, we really want to kind of protect those as potential lots to build that those redevelopments would be building momentum off of. Their next criteria or their next level was lots adjacent to other land bank or city-owned lots where you could actually build some economy of scale. So in locations where we could help a developer identify, wow, we've got, you know, 3 or 5 lots all within a pretty close area. And that starts to make sense, right? I'm not just trying to come in and do a one-off project, but I could come in and get some economy of scale by doing maybe 5 units in an area. So that was another thing that they looked at of how they wanted to kind of prioritize. And then finally, their standalone lots. And that would be, if it was a standalone lot, then it's a little bit more kind of open. I will also say, because a number of their lots are located within what are previously redlined areas, and I can talk a little bit about what that means, but it was a discriminatory practice. And so because of that, they do give first priority to individuals who live in the area. So that was something that they had already established, that individuals who live or are from the neighborhood kind of get first priority. And they also had some lots that are kind of unbuildable because of steep slopes or they're super tiny or just weird things going on. And so they also have some priorities around selling those to adjacent property owners. But if the lot falls into one of these categories and it's really buildable, then they'll try not to sell it to an adjacent property owner just to make their yard bigger. Go ahead. I think there's one more I have on here. This is also a couple other really interesting resources if you've never used these before. The one on the left is the Urban Land Institute, and it kind of does a little calculator simulator on cost of affordable housing and does it pencil out? So this is kind of a fun little simulator to kind of play with if you've never done that before. And then on some of the local housing solutions, this is also another really interesting resource. It actually, if you put in, at least for some of our bigger communities, if you put in your address or your city, I shouldn't say your address, if you put your city in, it's going to compile a lot of housing related data that's pulled right from the census. It's pretty impressive. In some ways makes us consultants feel like we're not really needed quite as much when it comes to some of the data pieces, but we still do provide some of that analysis. But that's also a really great resource if you've never used or looked at that one before. So I think that was my last additional resources that we thought you might find interesting. Happy to answer any other questions.
I'll jump back in quick and go back to Chad's comment about housing studies and the whole windshield assessment. I get where you're coming from. It's definitely not easier to do a windshield assessment. I think you're kind of trading sweat equity for the lower cost point. We do have some things that we are offering to try to provide as much information as we can for communities who just don't have the funds to spend on that kind of thing. I'm going to drop a couple links into the chat right now. Yeah, that went to everyone. That first one is the Strategic Housing Council's dashboard. This is in super early stages right now. At the moment, you can sort that by city or county. And I guess this right now shows units developed since January 1st of 2023. It shows single family and multifamily units created. And our plan for this is to update it quarterly, but you'll be able to sift through the data month to month. The goals for right now for this is to show where state funding has been used and also show the number of households that are, I guess, subsiding on $22,000 or less. This next one is NIFA.mysidewalk.com. This one has been around for a little bit longer and is more robust. You can search on this by city or town, census tract, or county, I believe. And this will show you, you can analyze by demographics, economy, housing, and quality of life. So this will just kind of give you as much of a leg up as we're able to right now. Like I said, the dashboard is super young and we're planning to just make this as robust and as much of a resource for Nebraska as possible.
Great. Thank you, Joe and Amy. Yeah, so now is your time as attendees, excuse me, to have your questions answered by our presenters today. While you're thinking of those, entering those in the chat box, Sean, if you're still with us, would you mind just elaborating on the AI comment that you put in the chat box?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks for the wonderful presentation today. I believe Joe, Mary Emery from our Rural Prosperity Program is on the NIFA Strategic Planning Council, so we have some representation there. Yeah, that webinar that I put in the chat there just happened the hour before this one, and so they'll have that uploaded. One thing that they used ArcGIS to basically use Landsat maps and specific to trailer homes or manufactured homes, and it could pick out the software could pick out manufactured homes and basically do a satellite assessment of where affordable housing was, and they did it at the state level, all of Indiana at one time. So some really high level. And then the second one was more along the lines of what Joe shared with kind of using a dashboard from Iowa State. So there's a couple of, and how they're basically a similar version. And I think they had a little AI integration is there as well. So thank you for all those things. And you can hear about those things yourself and those resources when that gets posted in a day or two.
Thanks, John.
And
Appreciate it.
that lends itself to Chad's question about how to minimize costs of housing studies, without doing the door-to-door windshield assessment. So thank you. So Joe, I interrupted you, I think. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just going to say that Susan Poulos at NIFA She's our data analyst and resident ArcGIS guru. So with the NIFA.my sidewalk, you have quite a bit you can do with that, but she does have an ArcGIS license that she is more than happy to dive into. If you are looking for information that's not available on our profile, you can reach out to me. I'll connect you with her and we can get you set up with something a little more involved.
Good. Would both of you just put your contact information in the chat box for our participants today? So what questions, thoughts, comments do you have? Do you see this as a valuable tool in your community? I know it's early, but it sounds like a great resource. Sometimes we end up not even knowing what we don't know and feeling overwhelmed about where do we go for information. And this seems like something that would be very useful. So what questions are there for our speakers? Well, hearing none, I just want to make you aware that today's presentation, as well as past webinars, will be available on our HomeNE.us website, probably tomorrow or Monday at the latest. So if you want to go back and just review what Joe and Amy have shared with us today, feel free to check that out. Great information that can be utilized all across Nebraska. What I heard, small communities to large municipalities can all benefit from this. So I appreciate that. So Joe and Amy have put their contact information in the chat box. So you'll want to be jotting that down as well and reaching out to them and their entities. So next month, just to let you know, we will have Gary Pearson from North Platte joining us. He is involved with both the Chamber and Economic Development out in North Platte. If you have not been to North Platte recently or have never visited it, it's a community with over 2.3 billion with a B of new or emerging industrial, commercial, and housing development projects. North Platte is setting records in retail sales, lodging revenues, and economic activities. And most recently in 2023, North Platte was named the Nebraska Economic Development Community of the Year. So Gary will be joining us to talk about the different ways that North Platte has utilized tax increment financing as a tool in their housing development that is occurring in the North Platte area. So, and as a reminder, November will be our final webinar for the year 2024. We always push pause and take the month of December off. So please feel free to join us. Registration information will be coming out in the next few weeks. So Joe and Amy, thank you so much for participating today. Great information. We appreciate it very much. Do you have any final thoughts or comments?
No, great. Thanks for having us do this. And I don't have any questions or any other final thoughts, but yeah, if there's any questions I can answer, just reach out anytime.
Okay, super. So, and any last thoughts from any of our attendees today? Well, if not, thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you back here in November. And once again, thank you to Joe and Amy for participating, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lauren and Josh. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
You're welcome.